Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Trade and Tech podcast brought to you by Gaia Dynamics. I'm Emil Stefanuti, co-founder and CEO of Gaia Dynamics. And as always, I'm joined by Tom Gould, Gaia's Chief Strategy and Compliance Officer. Hey, Tom, how are things? Interesting month.
Interesting month, interesting week, but seems to be positive momentum in the industry. So.
Absolutely. And we have a special type of episode today that I'm super excited about. As you know, we typically talk a lot about what's happening in global trade space and how technology is impacting how we work and how the work gets done. But today we have a different angle into trade tech, and it's actually talking to one of the founders building great stuff for kind of the next generation of tools in this industry. So super excited to have Justin Sherlock with us today and to kick off this new track of conversation. So welcome, Justin. Very, very happy to have you join our pod today.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really excited for this. And it's been a ton of fun watching Gaia's product develop and getting to know you both over the last few years. So yeah, really appreciate the opportunity and excited to dive in and learn from you both.
Really, really cool. So for those of you that don't know Justin, he's the co-founder and CEO of Caspian. Great company, pioneering the world's first AI tariff refund service. And I'll let, Justin in a second tell us more about what that means. But before that, I'll do my best to try to tell you about Justin's very interesting background, very unique, I think, for the industry. So before Caspian, Justin was at Flexport, senior director of and head of Flexport Capital. Before that, he was in the investment world, first at Barclays and then at TA Associates. So to make his background even more interesting, Justin is also a licensed customs broker. So quite the interesting combination. So what did I miss? Justin, anything interesting that I didn't mention?
I'm picking up tennis this year, and in between filing CAPE refunds. I love fantasy and sci-fi. I love history. Yeah, my sort of career arc through finance into tech we definitely get into, but I'm just really excited to be building in trade in this at this time. I think it's a really unique time for the trade space, and kind of weaves together a lot of my personal passions and then what being in San Francisco now for 10 years, all the AI boom that's happening, it's a synthesis of a lot of interests right now. So I'm excited.
Yeah, no kidding. And, I always find it fascinating to hear about other founders' stories, right? And yours is very interesting because you didn't start in tech. So what pulled you into building in this space?
Yeah. Um, I always wanted to build a business, and I think when I was in finance, I was sort of looking for good ideas, and I realized after being in finance for some period of time that I wasn't going to be able to develop that really good idea and that I was passionate about, that was aligned with my interests and skills, unless I started getting into building product and building companies, and that's what drove me to Flexport. And I really love physical industries. I had offers to go to other technology companies in the Bay Area that were in fintech and in some of these other spaces in hardware tech. And I was really drawn to the real world problems of the supply chain. I spent a ton of my time in private equity working with supply chain services companies, invested in the utility bill metering business, like very, very tangible real world problems. And so I felt like a lot of the work that we did in finance could and should be automated. And now that's starting to happen with the advent of LLMs. And I think, when I look at some of the professional services work, the opportunity for AI to automate some of what was drudgery for me as a junior person in finance, I kind of see that pattern happening in professional services, and I'm excited to go after that with Caspian. So yeah, a mix of different things that led me into tech, but seeing the potential of where tech was going as an investor, and then actually working with it as an operator, um, gave me the conviction to start Caspian.
And I'm curious to see what led you to the global trade space. The tech and finance aspect of it obviously is a stepping stone, but
Mhm.
What drew you to getting involved in trade?
Yeah. I mean, I was a huge Legos, trains, boats, Hot Wheels kid growing up. And I think, there's a lot of, I think there people that work in the supply chain, like they get a particular amount of excitement from seeing, that container ship float by and especially in San Francisco, going to the Oakland port. Um, the when I actually started my career, I was in the energy industry and I was in power and utilities, and I started seeing infrastructure. Like I didn't notice it until I was an investor and I was or an investment banker, and I was touring around power plants and understanding, the financial modeling behind a power plant, and then, going into private equity and understanding, well, how does a freight forwarder's business model work? How does a truck broker's business model work? How does, bill factoring work, invoice factoring work for that industry? What are all the data providers that are taking terminal data and using it for any number of use cases? Um, like that was sort of my foray into the supply chain space. And then the Flexport opportunity was exciting because my first project at Flexport was actually buying a customs brokerage in Canada and expanding Flexport into Canada. And that was my first awareness of customs. I didn't know anything about customs until day one at Flexport. And then my whole world was customs for the first 3 months that I was at Flexport. And I think one thing that you realize, and one of the hard things about building in trade, is that there's so much subject matter expertise in these niche areas, and there's so many different industries. We're dealing with all physical things. The classification system is all physical things in all the different countries. Gaia is structuring this data in every country, and every country has their own way of classifying every single thing.
Yeah.
Well, there's a ton of expertise in each of these end market industries that you need to tap into when you're building in trade. And that just was really exciting problem to me. I love learning about all these niches and figuring out how we can build software that makes it easy to do business in these places. So yeah.
I really empathize with that. I don't think I would have ever guessed, right, that I'd be running a company like Gaia today, right? Although, like when I look back, just like you were saying, based on your own experience, I can totally see how some of those dots actually connect, right? And looking back into my life and my career, it's almost now it looks obvious, right? It's almost like I was getting ready for
Yeah.
these roles since I was a
Yes.
kid, But what about you, Tom? When do you know that this was this would be your path? Now everybody knows Tom, and you've been in this thing forever. But when do you know?
I kind of go back a little ways when I think about that question. I go back to the early 1990s when NAFTA was first being talked about and being implemented, and I saw this new agreement that raised opportunities for a lot of companies that had these crazy rules that nobody understood. And I saw that as potentially an opportunity to help companies to understand those rules. And as I, grew in my career and worked more and more, what I realized was that NAFTA was one set of rules for one agreement between three countries, but there are hundreds, maybe thousands of different rules out there and different programs and agreements out there that will allow companies to be more efficient in their global trade and allow them to lower their costs in global trade. And it just seemed like an opportunity because we had companies that were helping, but were really doing it only at the surface. And what I'm thinking about is your typical customs broker that was filing entries, but they really didn't know the rule behind it and how companies needed to qualify for the agreements. And so to me, that was really what first brought me into advising companies on global trade, was realizing that there were all these rules. And when you understand the rules, you start to develop opportunities that are very valuable to companies.
Tom, I'm curious because you've seen a couple waves of technology now enter this trade space. How how has the role of a broker or a trade compliance person changed in that time frame with moving to digital, moving to the cloud, moving to big data 10 years ago, and now like with the new AI boom, like each of this is we've been talking about technology waves impacting the supply chain for the entirety of your career. How has that changed the roles of these people?
I'll start by looking back even beyond my career. So before I got involved, customs brokers were guys with bicycles and clipboards sitting in the ports, writing stuff down, looking at the stuff that it was getting loaded onto the boats and taken off of the boats. In the 1980s, customs here in the US started automating. And so what happened was customs evolved from clipboards and maybe back in the office typewriters to having computers. And so they became, for the most part, data entry clerks. A lot of what they were doing was taking data from bills of lading, commercial invoices, packing lists, various different documents, and putting it onto forms that would be filed with customs. And those forms were automated over the years, automated more and more. And where I see the role of the broker today is really changing, because the automation of the clerical tasks is happening as we speak, is happening more and more. And so what I see as the future role of the customs broker is really more of an advisor. I think of the customs broker as an advisor, kind of like a CPA is an advisor on how to strategically take advantage of the tax rules. I think a customs broker needs to be the strategic advisor to companies as to how they can take advantage of the tariff rules. And with tariff rates increasing and surpassing the tax rates, we're starting to see a situation where companies are realizing that strategizing over taxes can sometimes have a negative impact on tariffs, to the point where by paying less taxes, they're actually paying more in tariffs. And so companies need to really understand those rules. And that, to me, is the future of the customs broker and the customs brokerage technology, or the technology around what the customs broker does.
Yeah, the scope of all professional services work is getting elevated now to a place that is challenging for everyone that has a knowledge work role,
Yes.
because what's the expectation is now rising of what an individual person is capable of producing. And that's a real challenge to upskill your entire workforce, to adopt new tooling, and to you know go into the office every day and do high leverage work instead of doing the paperwork um, that you might be accustomed to is not easy to achieve. But that's the shift that is happening. Um, yeah.
And speaking of tech, right? And I guess for someone hearing about, now everybody, I'm sure that whoever doesn't know about Caspian or what you do, now just based on the last 10 minutes of conversation, I would be very intrigued. Like, what is Caspian? What does it do? Like, what is this guy that came from finance and like trains? What is this guy building, and why does it matter?
Yeah. So we're building what we see as the first AI global trade advisor. We started with Drawback, um, and we are basically the platform today. What it does is ingest messy ERPs, outputs, forwarder, CSVs, trade documents, and structures all that data, normalizes it into standard schemas across customers and industries, and then identifies duty savings, actually goes captures those duty savings. So duty drawback was the first refund type that we started with. We're of course helping with the Cape Phase One refunds for IEPA tariffs. And we've also expanded into protest and post summary corrections, and uh, 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 reconciliation is coming soon, and basically enabling any company that imports into the U.S. to take advantage of these strategies that have been available to all companies, but really only leveraged by the Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000. And I think there's about 500,000 U.S. importers and exporters every year, 500,000 or so entities in the U.S. alone that are addressable here. And in the last year or two, a vast majority of them are now substantial duty payers, and don't have in-house trade compliance teams. I think fewer than 10% of importers have in-house trade compliance teams. And so these companies need some accessible expertise. And that's, I think, the promise of our AI platform is drop in all your data, process it, get actionable insights, take action. And that's the value that we're bringing to the U.S. importers today, and future countries in the coming years.
Beautiful. And yeah, it's definitely something that we see a lot of, right? It's the way we typically talk about it is, people first need to know what they need to know, right? And that's one thing that we've been spending a lot of time on. And if I'm an importer, let's say now into a new country or even the US, but a different kind of product, what do I need to know, right? And what are my classifications and tariffs and what regulations are applicable to me and why, and how do I get around them? And then we sort of migrate into what do I need to do, right? So now that I know what I need to know, what do I need to do? And it's a little bit like helping people figure out what things need to be done, how they need to get done, help them potentially do as many as can be, assisted by AI, and then checking whether they were done correctly, and then, making sure that the monitoring takes place so that you don't have to redo them again, or at least when things are due and need to be done again. We found a tremendous amount of pain, right, associated with kind of not knowing these things. And I think the third one, which I think, we totally understand where you're coming from, is a little bit of what can I optimize, right? So now that I know what I need to know and I've done what I should have done, is there anything else that I should be doing, right? That would make my life or my, stakeholders' lives easier, right? So I think I agree with you. I think AI it's now perfect kind of catalyst to make some of these things happen. And I think that as CEOs and co-founders of companies, and it doesn't matter the space, but especially in tech and potentially even more in trade tech, we don't always get to learn too much from each other, right? Like we're running like crazy, especially these last 12 months. Who has time? You and I, Justin, and with Tom and others, we may bump into each other at an event here and there. So I find it particularly interesting, right, when we get a chance to learn from one another. This is a huge
Absolutely.
problem, and even though we overlap in some things, I think that the problem and the opportunity is so big that at least I am happy to sort of share the ride
Yeah,
as we go.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
so what has been harder than you expected building in this space? Now that you've been doing this
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was alluding to this before, but it's really like the Dunning-Kruger effect of you have to have a little bit of ego to start a company of any type. You might think you know everything about a space. Typically, what I've seen or the way I've felt is, and what I've talked to other founders about this is like, you get most excited about the ideas that you actually think you know more than you actually do. So you go in kind of innocently being like, oh, I know I can figure this out. And that attitude is what helps you actually get through the hard parts of it. And what I see in customs is as you get into any of these specific operations within a specific industry, you have the overlay of the industry and the regulations. Um, and Yes, you get into these really niche areas where it's super tactical, and there are 5 people on the planet that know the right answer. And you have to be able to fight through that friction if you're gonna be successful building a platform that is addressable to all end markets. You have to be able to go into the nitty gritty of each of those sectors and spaces, and that's not for the faint of heart. And I think we're often routinely having this feeling of hiking to the top of the mountain and then like seeing the higher mountains in the distance and being like, oh, this mountain we just climbed is actually small. And there's like these huge opportunities out there that we can still do. And that's exciting, but it's also, intimidating, and you got to keep the team motivated through all of those waves. So yeah, that's been the biggest realization or challenge, if you will, of doing this, I think has been The other thing I'll say about this is, like, I had ideas of companies in trade finance and immigration. I'm really excited to help address labor shortages in advanced manufacturing. Like, these are areas that I personally passionate about or know something deep about. And in some cases, it's either I know way too much, so I sort of see how the business could fail, and on the other hand, it's like I know too little and I don't know how to get started. And customs was the perfect mix of I know a lot, I know enough to get started and take the incremental next steps, and but I don't know so much that I know how I might fail, and that has been really nice to be on that it's kind of that middle ground there. I think this is like a market that historically was part of legal and finance and logistics and wasn't thought of as like a unified market. And now that's changed in the last several years, where the customs industry is kind of really solidifying as its own market in its own right. And so that's fun to be a part of.
Yeah, and I guess Tom, you have like one foot on each side of trade and tech, right? And I guess I always find it again fascinating when as a user you're just clicking around, right, and expecting that things will work one way or another, and even us, right, in tech don't always think about why what went on, right, what had to happen in order for this button to actually be clickable and give me a good or bad result. So I don't know if it's always clear, right, for the end user, especially in trade, like everything that goes on. Now you see it firsthand on a daily basis, and you saw it at Flexport also, and other tech companies that you've been dealing with. Like, what do you think, is the typical kind of perspective of just, let's say, a customs broker that is just trying to get either a classification or some sort of filing or some sort of document? Like, I always find it very interesting. Like, what is that relationship between the expectation and what actually, it's happening behind the scenes?
One of the most interesting things that I have found with dealing with customs and trade over the years is all of the different parties that come together when we're dealing with trade, especially the regulatory aspect of trade, how every party has a very different perspective. And that different perspective drives a lot of what we're talking about. And it also is something that the technology is starting to get to the point where it's helping us to understand. And what I'm talking about is things as simple as what's the definition of a product? And I'll take a t-shirt as an example. When you talk to people in the apparel industry, they look at a garment and they say that's a t-shirt. But when you talk to somebody that's in customs, that's responsible for regulating the import of t-shirts, they might look at that and say, you know what, that's not a t-shirt, that's a pullover. And if you talk to a customs broker, they're kind of in between and they're having to play this balancing act of what is the product from the industry's perspective and what is the product from the regulatory perspective. And I think that's an area where technology has in the past had a lot of difficulty managing those discrepancies. And t-shirt is just one of many examples. There's lots and lots of examples pretty much anywhere you look throughout the tariff schedule where there are different interpretations of different products based on perspective, based on who it is that's looking at it. And that to me has always been one of the most fascinating aspects of what I do and when I'm working with companies, when I'm, you know, talking to an importer and telling them, well, your t-shirt won't be seen as a t-shirt by the government. And in some cases, that's a good thing. In some cases, it's not a good thing for the company or for the government. And so understanding all of those dynamics is to me the most interesting aspect of what we do. And that is we're able to capture the data, capture the information, but make intelligent decisions on it by understanding the different perspectives and helping companies to take action based on those perspectives. Because it could be that if you want your t-shirt to be a t-shirt for customs purposes, for whatever reason, there may be a need to make a change. And is the company willing to do that? Or is there maybe a change in customs where we can make an argument to tell customs that, well, maybe your definition isn't right and maybe your definition needs to be changed. But all those pieces of the puzzle are, to me, what I find the most fascinating, and where I think that the technology is really just starting to understand, be able to help companies with making those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and I think I was thinking the other day, and talking to somebody and say, well, I think I spend an equal amount of time, if not more, sort of explaining how things work than selling. So what's AI? What's not AI? What is the difference between ChatGPT and Caspian, right, or Gaia?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I guess how much time, right, Justin, are you spending in education versus actual selling?
What's happening rapidly, companies are purchasing off-the-shelf AI solutions, and all of their employees have access to it. Over half of U.S. companies are purchasing some combination of Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT. And that's now data. That data is now probably a month or two old, and I'm sure the number's like 75% now. Many companies are buying multiple off-the-shelf products, and so the teams are. They always had Google search. Now Google search has AI embedded. You can search specific classification rules. You can ask, do these 299 codes stack? You can Google that and get an answer. And so they might not be right, and it might not be relevant for your business. And that execution level knowledge, the broker level knowledge, is something that AI will never be able to replicate for regulatory reasons, but also just in terms of the user experience or the quality of output from off the shelf tools. You should expect that all companies are educating themselves with this technology. Customs is using the technology to audit and run their daily workflows, and that is a massive sea change from a year ago. And so when you're selling in this space, the quality, like I said about professional services work, the quality of it, the stakes consistently getting raised. You are now entering your initial sales call is now the second or third time that the customers thought about this. 2 years ago, when we were starting Caspian, most of our sales calls was like, have you ever heard of duty drawback before? And people, a lot of customers had not. And now that's changed. And now it's not about whether or not duty drawback and can explain what duty drawback is. You need to be asking really good questions about how are you doing returns management? Do you what systems are you storing your sales data in, are you gathering all of your import documents from all of your forwarders? Do you have product level breakdowns? Do your forwarders file on a product level basis per entry line? Like, you got to get really specific about qualifying deals now and working with customers to develop a solution that is going to add value to them quickly, because they need to go faster. They are being pressured to use off the shelf things to solve problems. And, they're coming in with a higher degree of knowledge than they had. It may not be correct. And you need to maybe spend some time educating on them on why their views may be misinformed by the technology, or saying, hey, I saw you're paying a lot of auto tariffs. We should really be storing the intended use in your product catalog because you're not in the auto space. Like, some of these things that I'm sure you guys deal with all the time on classification, you getting into those higher order conversations faster than you were. And so I think it comes back to talent quality, upskilling, and having really good data in the first place to both on the vendor side and on the customer side.
And 100% agree. And, it's funny. We as you know, we made this kind of bold move and say, well, what would happen, right, if we had Gaia take the custom broker license exam, right? How good would it be? And it was pretty good. But then we put it, we asked the same questions and sort of put ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini through the same kind of exercise, right? And they failed miserably, right? But the conviction with which, of course, they provide answers is so compelling, right? That you would think, yeah, this makes total sense, right? And if I disagree, I'm kind of dumb because this thing is telling me that, with such conviction, right? So I do think, right, that we're still in that moment where you get that fast transition from people not knowing a lot about this technology and what was sort of the hour of the possible, with now potentially knowing too much or thinking that they know so much. And I don't know if it happens to you, but then it's like, what do you mean you cannot do this, right? And it's something that is super, super hard to even, fathom building with AI or whatever other technology, and say, well, actually, not everything is possible, right? So we're in that moment where everything seems kind of magically possible, and still a reality check every now and then on what's
Yeah.
actually doable.
You never want, I mean, you always want to be in a position where you're under promising, over delivering as a vendor. And that's getting harder and harder to do because you're getting squeezed from the base model providers who are branding themselves as the solution to all of the world's problems, literally. And then on the regulator side, increased scrutiny over everything that's happening. So,
Yeah.
as a life as a services provider or a software provider is there's a ton of opportunity, but it's also harder than it's ever been, I think.
Yeah, and you see those merging quite fast, right? And very recently, there's been this whole conversation that was okay. We started with Copilot, and it seems just yesterday, right, that Copilot was a big thing, and now it's almost like expired, or or at least tired. But now it's all about autopilot, right? So that migration from Copilot to autopilot, and what is potentially something that can be in one category as opposed to the other. And that sort of takes us to the CBP ruling from a few weeks ago, and sort of what that looks like in the context of customs, right? So now, sure, there's a lot of things that AI can do, but there's a lot of rules, right, to comply, and what is customs business, and what is doable and not doable, and where should things stop, and sort of, I guess, what is, in your opinion, right? And I'll start with you, Tom. Like, the what is the future of this gonna look like, right? Right now, we're in this middle where we're saying, well, we still have to block or control the usage for certain things. But at some point, right, it's all about efficiency and being able to actually handle the growing complexities and the growing kind of volumes of work with a somewhat, diminishing population to the actual work. So, what do you think, in your opinion, what do you think is in the future?
The ruling that you mentioned, there's been a lot of talk about it, really just because it was published recently. But to me, it didn't raise a lot of new issues. It raised a couple of new issues, but really it clarified customs position, longstanding position. And that is that somebody that's doing customs business on behalf of another has to be a licensed customs broker. And then the question really is, what is and what is not customs business? And the definition of customs business was drafted long ago before technology was involved. And so customs is being forced to squeeze the current definition of customs business into what happens with existing models. But when you look at the overall desires of customs and that is that they want the customs broker to be the one that's in the loop, the person that's licensed as a customs broker to be the one that's in the loop, that's actually making the ultimate decisions. And so as long as we look at the tools that are available as tools for either the broker or the importer themselves, the importer can make the decision without having a customs broker. It's only a customs broker that can make the decisions on behalf of a third party. But so as long as the customs broker is still making the ultimate decisions as to what goes where, what data requirements are going to be filed with the government, I think that customs is okay with it. Really, what they don't want to see happening is foreign companies getting involved in U.S. commerce and getting involved in an advisory position where companies that may not be as um, closely linked to the U.S. customs laws and regulations and rules, making decisions on behalf of companies that are bound by those laws, those rules. And so, anyways, so that's kind of my thought about the idea behind the ruling. I don't see it as a significant change, just a the most recent clarification of the position.
Yeah, I mean, customs will always want to take the broadest definitional view of what is customs business, right? They'll always want to assert control over anything in their sphere that's touching the 19th CFR. And I think what's really interesting is, and I don't think this is widely discussed, I can say the vast majority of customs brokerages use offshore labor to do some type of data processing. And there is a ruling about offshore labor for data processing. And there is now a ruling for OCR, any type of AI technology doing any type of data processing. And customs hasn't enforced either of these rulings yet. I think it's clearly one of these levers that they've now given themselves. If there is some type of investigation that's going sideways, they now have legal standing to go off of to penalize somebody for doing the wrong thing. And I don't think that these rulings are going to be enforced aggressively in isolation. I think they'll be used as part of enforcement action for other things that are going wrong in investigations. That's like, well, this violation of the forced labor SOP happened because you were not using the proper process or technology with a licensed person's oversight, and that's when it'll be kind of used in combination. So I don't know. That's my view on it, but it feels I think it feels like the right thing to do is to always ensure that your data providers have that expertise in house, regardless of software or services, and that as an importer are covering yourselves with either your broker or your provider or hiring that person.
Do you see, Justin or Tom, what is, in your opinion, sort of the balance between innovation and sort of regulation in here, right? And it's not unique to trade, right? But I guess there are a lot of things that now for us in tech, we know that could be vastly improved or accelerated. And yes, there's always some risk, right? Just like you would say, and I think Andrew Ng says, uh, you wouldn't say that a car is dangerous on its own, right? You wouldn't forbid cars, although every now and then some drunk person would just go and use the car for something that it wasn't intended to do. So, is there a risk of compromising innovation, or at what point we get into a balance issue between what the technology can do and what we're going to allow it to do?
You know, all business involves risk, and new businesses based on new technology involve more risk than otherwise. I think about the, issues about water and electricity surrounding AI, and energy. Those are new risks that are not directly related to what the AI companies do, but it's risks that they have to take into account. And there are going to be different regulations and different rules that they're going to have to deal with in just being able to operate as a business. But then there's also the social pressure, right? There's, in addition to the business or the regulatory risk, there's also the social risk. So you think you see news stories about companies that want to build data farms, AI farms, in areas where the residents don't want those farms, not because they don't want the business brought into their neighborhood, but because they're concerned about the energy consumption, or maybe they're concerned about groundwater or something completely unrelated to the service that's being provided. Well, I see that, we're in a similar situation, and that is that we need to evolve. And the way to do that, in my mind, is to be part of the conversation, to be open and to be transparent with your customers, with the regulators about what's happening and what's being done. And if there's something that needs to change, then make the change. And one of the things that I've seen with the technology industry is tech companies are really good at making change, at changing as required, and that may mean that they're changing their process, or they're um, lobbying or pushing to make change on in the government or in the regulations if that's appropriate. Anyways, but I'd love to hear both of your
Yeah,
thoughts on the question, Justin.
no, I agree with that. I think um, as an organization, you have to think about your risk posture, and that's kind of exactly what you're saying. And I think there's also a new way to think about risk in trade, which is that the only constant over the next 10 to 20 years will be changing supply chains, changing bilateral relations between countries, constantly changing trade agreements. We know that supply chains are nearshoring and reshoring over the last several years. That's a bipartisan push in the United States. Both parties are pro-tariff, and one is maybe more pro-tariff than another at the moment. But historically, it's been the opposite, and certainly the Biden administration did everything they could to continue the Trump trade policy from his first term. So I think we know that there's risk for adopting new technology, well, there's also risk for doing nothing. There's probably more risk to do
Yeah.
things the way that you were doing them. And the regulator has a OpenAI and Claude contract, and they're using this technology every day to audit all of us in the industry. So, what's riskier is actually like a really interesting question. Like in many cases, I think it makes sense for businesses to be a little bit more risk on with adopting new and experimenting with new technology, because it will allow them to be far more responsive to an environment that's just changing so rapidly that the existing systems can't keep up. I mean, I was at a conference last week with heads of trade compliance talking about their off-the-shelf ERP and product lifecycle management systems, the largest names in the space. And those systems can't store more than several classifications on a given product. Well, that system doesn't work anymore then for that company's entire supply chain. And that is their system of record that they've been on for 10 plus years. So how do we as vendors help get this message out that actually the risk is not adapting? And if you're I think that's the conversation that I'm trying to have with customers. And then on the other hand, as a startup, we have to be very careful about how we build trust and build relationships with customers, because a single misstep by any startup in the space is actually a bit of a black eye for everyone. A single data leak, a single phishing attack hurts all of us that are trying to help the industry change. And so yeah, this is definitely how I think about the risk. But yeah, Emil, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, and we see it in an interesting way because we're not just focused on the US, right? So, and to your point, one of the things that makes it really challenging is saying, well, those are the regulations in the US. So, but it doesn't necessarily, mean that it's the same regulation everywhere. So there are some pieces of innovation that we're seeing now that could be applicable in other countries, but not in the US, although you can see the actual value and potential that they have. And it's almost a shame that you say, well, one of the largest trade, markets out there cannot benefit from these with the current regulations that exist. So I think for a while we'll be seeing that balancing act. I trust that, we have enough smart people around to sort of see some of these developments and see these things and be able to balance the risk with the reward in a way, like it's happened in so many industries and so many changes, technological or otherwise, in time. Um, but that is a little bit of an interesting situation that we're in, right? We see things like, we could totally do this. Well, not in the US, sorry, but we can deploy these in other countries that are more willing to accept certain technological kind of changes. So I guess that takes me to the question, and I'll start with you, Justin, of what is sort of fundamentally hard to automate in your experience or in what you're doing, right? And we see our own set of things that we say, well, we're not even going to try, right? Some are because of regulatory constraints, but others are just things that you would say, well, this is not really yet something that can be automated, or that probably wouldn't make sense to be automated, right? And a lot of it in our case is that sort of intelligence, that human experience intelligence where you say, well, you said it, right? There's 5 people in the world that know this thing. How do you automate that? But that's, I'm sure
Yeah.
you're going through that.
Yeah, it's the classic problem of, you can get to 80%, you get to 90%, getting to 100%, and having a product that operates with 99.999% accuracy on any given regulation when the regulations are changing so quickly is very challenging. And then for you all, doing it globally is exponentially that much more challenging. And so I think there is a final mile of service delivery that will be human in the loop for a very, very long time. And that's certainly how we view the value prop of Caspian, is that, any software company is capable of getting to 80-90%. What's really strategic is when you compare great technology with superhumans that are experts to deliver the outcome to the customer. And in our case, the outcome is tariff refunds in the bank, or declining duty burden, or an updated forecast by the hour based on the latest news for where your landed cost is going to head. These types of things are automating a ton of work, but you need to get to that outcome, and someone has to review the thing before it is submitted, legally speaking, but also just because the complexity of the regulations across every end market in the physical world. So yeah, that's I guess the hard piece is that final mile, and how can you do that efficiently and well to deliver the outcome, because getting to 80-90% with the tooling that is available these days is easier than it's ever been.
I have a thought on the heart, and it's something that I've talked a little bit about, and I want to really push out more and more. And to me, I think one of the really hard things in our industry, trade, technology, is communication. And what I mean by communication, I'm talking about the technology communicating. And it's hard because we're stuck with old communication protocols that we all have to deal with. And if you look in other industries, for example, if you look at the banking industry with companies like Plaid, or you look in the medical field with companies like MyChart, where there's either a company or a consortium of companies that have gotten together and said, you know what, the hard part is communicating with all of these different systems that are out there. So every bank has their own system, and every bank has its own way of communicating outside of its system. When we're talking in the medical field, every doctor's office, hospital, pharmacy, lab, they all have their own systems, and they all have their own ways of communicating. The hard part to me, and this is an issue that hasn't yet been solved in our industry, is that protocol that's used by companies to communicate, as well as by governments to communicate. One of the things that I think was a bad decision made back in the 1980s or 1990s was when Customs was first creating the ACE system that we see today, here Customs here in the US, creating the ACE system. They decided to maintain the old communication protocol from the previous system. And because of that, we're still dealing with this today. We're dealing with message sets that are in 80 characters, all uppercase, limited sets of characters. And to me, that's one of the hard problems that we as a technology industry involved in international trade, we need to solve that issue. And once we solve that issue, a lot of the other issues that we're having become easier to deal with.
Great point. I think at NCBFAA, there was a lot of conversation about specific validations that may or may not be running in entry filing software, and that may or may not be running in ACE. And those are different. And so ACE, and then the regulations is the third piece, and the regulations are changing. And so like these three elements are disconnected: the regulations, ACE, and the entry filing. And in some cases, two of the three are correct and the other one's wrong, and it's never the same set. And so keeping those three in alignment is a major challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I, as it usually happens, right? Especially the three of us, we could be doing these for 6 hours and nonstop. But I know We're running out of time here, and just in closing, I was saying I wanted to sort of put you on the spot with a little bit of a rapid fire, right? Here's 3 questions, right? The first one is what is one misconception about global trade?
Man, I should have prepped better for these. One misconception about global trade that that we will revert back to a free trade economy.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Me too.
Unfortunately.
I have to agree.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes. All right. So another question. So one trend people are underestimating these days.
The adaptability of young people to learn new things and adjust to a job environment where there's very low demand for entry level, and I think
That's a great answer. Actually,
there's going to be some really interesting things that come out of the next generation coming up.
100%. That's a great answer, and I totally agree with it. And last but not least, what's one piece of advice to importers today?
Store and centralize 100% of your trade documents and customs entry information. Don't rely on your vendors or your brokers to do it for you. Please save it down yourself.
Really good point.
That's a really good point. Well, Justin, thank you so much, man. I enjoy these conversations with you a lot, and I know Tom does too. Thanks for spending some time with us today. We'll have to do more of these as things develop, and we'll compare notes again soon. But again, keep up the great work you guys are doing. I'll see you in the next event.
You as well. Hopefully. We'll see you. I'm sure we'll see you in May, if not June, for sure.
Yeah, there you go. And Tom, thanks again for doing these with me. It's always a lot of fun. We'll for everybody, we'll be back in about a month. Stay tuned. And again, thanks guys. This was a lot of fun.